Hello and welcome to J Talks Film. Today we're looking at the 1988 horror fairy tale from director Stan Winston, Pumpkinhead. Stan Winston spent the first decade of his film career working in makeup and special effects, and this is what he's most well known for, having worked on a lot of very high-profile films and won several Oscars. He worked on Terminator, Terminator 2, John Carpenter's The Thing, and even Jurassic Park. Now with Pumpkinhead, he was originally only tapped to do the makeup and special effects, but he ended up taking it on as his full directorial debut. On an extremely limited $3 million budget, they managed to do some really amazing practical effects work on this film. Now, I couldn't find much information on the behind the scenes of this movie, but I did find quite a bit of information about the creation of the actual Pumpkinhead creature. I highly recommend checking out the Stan Winston School YouTube page to see the behind the scenes of how they created the Pumpkinhead creature, but I'm personally more interested in how it came out in the final product. So from the best I can tell, production went pretty smoothly. They came in on time and under budget. I want to say right up front, unequivocally, that I think Pumpkinhead is a very well-made movie. I have a ton of respect for the entire creative team and the practical team. Everything's well done in this movie. It feels like the director or the creators had a vision and they effectively brought this vision to life exactly the way they planned to. With that said, this is likely going to be the most schizophrenic and confused critique that I've done so far, because while I'm going to be spending the majority of this video praising Pumpkinhead and what a good job they did, I don't like the movie very much. Something about it just doesn't click with me. I'm hoping that through digging deep here, I'll be able to discover exactly why it doesn't work for me. So with that said, let's jump in to Stan Winston's Pumpkinhead. The movie opens in a tiny American southern rural town in 1957. I don't think they specify an exact area of the United States or an exact state. If they did, I missed it, but they do a good job of setting the tone here. You get an idea for the type of area this is. Extremely poor, backwards. They don't appear to even have power in their little farmhouse. We are introduced to a small family. They are obviously very nervous. They are locking the doors. The father grabs his shotgun, and we see a man, for some reason, running through the woods, clearly terrified. This man begins banging on the door, trying to get the family to let him in, and they refuse. They tell him to go away or they're going to shoot him themselves.
Tom Harley! Open up, Tom! It's me, Clayton Heller! Tom! Please open the door! Oh, for God's sakes, Tom, open up, please! It's after me, Tom, it's gonna get me!
God in heaven, Tom.
Tom!
The man's forced to flee, and then some sort of creature kills him. And then we immediately cut to the present, which would actually be 1988. Pumpkinhead presents itself as a grim fairy tale, and the opening of the film sets that tone perfectly. Everything in the film is pushing this same theme, right down to the color grading, which is one of the more interesting things about the way the film is shot. Lighting inside is not just warm, it's downright orange. And if you go outside after dark, it's not just darker, but you're essentially walking through a blue haze. Everything has a sense of storytelling over realism, and I do find that very effective. It all feels very intentional and appropriate in a fairy tale like this. Fairy tales are not meant to be true stories. They are understood to be fiction, and they often involve magical creatures and have some sort of moral story they are telling. Pumpkinhead is all of the above. It is a true fairy tale. Our lead, Harley, is played by the legendary Lance Henriksen. Lance Henriksen is wonderful in this role. In fact, he might play it a little bit too realistic, as everyone except him and his son seems to really be hamming it up in this movie. Now, it is a hyper-stylized film, so I actually think that was a good decision, and eventually Lance does pick it up. But he plays it very realistic, very low-key for about the first third of the movie before some crazy stuff starts to happen around him and his emotions begin to run a little rampant. Harley is a soft-spoken single father, runs some sort of little grocery store in this tiny community they live in, clearly dotes on his only son, whose best friend is his dog. His son makes him a necklace, and he swears to never take it off before they head for the shop.
I like presents.
Oh, well. Now this is something.
Goes around your neck.
This is something special.
You really like it?
I love it.
You don't have to wear it every day or nothing, just when it strikes you.
Give me a hug. I ain't never taking it off, punk.
A group of irresponsible young adults who have rented a cabin out in this rural area for the weekend to ride their dirt bikes around stop at Harley's shop to pick up some beer. This is a really long scene, but we are introduced to pretty much the entire cast of the film with a couple of notable exceptions. A dirt poor family pulls up as well. They're clearly locals that personally know Harley. The older son seems to be a bit of a punk and a bully, and they mentioned the legend of Pumpkinhead that seems to be some sort of local folklore.
Jimmy Joe, you done bad. Y'all know what settles on badness, don't you?
Pumpkinhead.
Pumpkinhead. Yo, stop. There ain't no Pumpkinhead.
What about old Mr. Foley?
He moved away. Pumpkinhead got
Teared off his head and drank all the blood.
it. Did not.
Did too.
Shut up, Hesse.
Keep away from Pumpkinhead unless you're tired of living.
His enemies are mostly dead. He's mean and unforgiving.
Stop it!
Bolted doors and windows barred. Guard dogs prowling in the yard. Won't protect you till you're dead. Nothing will from Pumpkinhead. So keep away from Pumpkinhead.
Stop it! Stop it!
One big complaint I have about this movie is all of these young adult characters feel completely dispensable and forgettable. I've seen this movie at least 3 times now, and I cannot remember the name of a single one of them. So I'm just going to call them Fonzie, Fonzie's brother, and the others. They mostly just exist so Pumpkinhead has something to kill. This grumpy old farmer needs some feed, and Harley accidentally left it back at his house. So he's forced to leave the shop for a few minutes to go get the feed, and he decides to leave his son and his dog behind. Now he clearly tells his son, do not leave the shop for any reason while I'm gone, and then he leaves. And maybe 4 seconds later, his son goes running out the front door after his dog, where Fonzie immediately hits him with his dirt bike and kills the child. Now, Fonzie's been making some bad decisions. We saw him drinking and driving on his way to this grocery store, so he obviously feels that he can't stay and call the police. He needs to go because apparently this isn't the first time he's hit somebody while drinking and driving, and he doesn't want to go to prison. So Fonzie and several others take off. One guy, Fonzie's brother, stays behind to watch the kid, while the others call the police or a paramedic to come check on him. Harley gets back to the store a few minutes later, and he's understandably a bit ticked off that these kids killed his son. So he gives Fonzie's brother a pretty nasty look, takes his son's body, and walks away with it. Now I joke a bit, but for the most part the scene actually is really well done. It's emotionally resonant. My only big complaint about it is I don't find it completely clear whether Harley's son is dead or just injured and unconscious. And it would really clear up some emotional misunderstandings and kind of recontextualize a couple of the following scenes, Back at the cabin, where some of them are trying to call the paramedics, and Fonzie won't let them, but they think the kid needs help. As the viewer, I didn't know if the kid was dead or not. That would really change my opinion on what's going on at this cabin. Now, that's of course not saying they shouldn't call the police either way. That is the right thing to do, but I didn't know if it was a matter of life and death. But either way, Fonzie ends up actually locking two of them in a room so they can't call anyone. So whether or not Fonzie is a horrible human being, that matter is settled, but I wish I more knew if there even was a chance to save the child at this point. Harley has a really sad scene with his dead son where he wraps his body up, and then he takes him to the shanty town where that dirty family lives. He wants the old grandpa to tell him where in the woods he can find some witch that he thinks might be able to help him. Now, the grandpa's refusing, telling him it's a bad idea, but as Harley's leaving, that older dirty boy from before tracks him down, and he says he can show him where the witch is, but he'll only go part of the way because that woman scares him. Harley carries his son's body into this dilapidated old shack in the swamp that he's led to by that kid. Inside, it is disgusting. It is covered in cobwebs. There are rats, there are tarantulas, there's snakes. And there's one really gross old woman. We've found our witch. She says her name is Haggis, but she reminds me of the hag from Army of Darkness.
Yo, she-bitch. Let's go.
Harley gives Haggis all the money he has in the world and begs her to avenge him. She refuses for a bit, but eventually gives in and sends him to an old graveyard to dig up this gross, dilapidated, maggot-covered, distorted corpse and bring it back to her. We also briefly cut back to Fonzie's brother, and the others to remind us that they are also in this movie, but they're not doing anything important at the moment. The witch explains that she's summoning Pumpkinhead as a spirit of vengeance for Harley. She uses his blood and his son's blood in the ritual, and Harley has a severe reaction, to say the least, while she performs it. The scene where Pumpkinhead is summoned is very impressive. This is where the film really stands out. The practical effects are incredible and still hold up nearly 40 years later. The beauty of good practical effects is that they never age. Harley passes out during the ritual and awakens seemingly several hours later. And as soon as he leaves, he seems to already be regretting his actions. He has a vision of his son asking him what he's done.
What'd you do, Daddy?
But he takes his son home and buries him next to his mother. Back at the cabin, we're finally gonna start the killing, and we start with Fonzie's brother. Now, during this killing, we're actually cutting back and forth between the murder and Harley himself, so we see that there is some sort of spiritual or mental connection between Harley and Pumpkinhead.
I need you.
Steve. Steve.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm sure the boy's gonna be fine. I'm sure his father's taking care of him.
So Fonzie suddenly magically has a complete change of heart, decides, you know what, from now on, I'm going to be a good person, and he's going to go let out the people that he had illegally imprisoned. They decide to go search for his brother, who went outside, but all they find is his bloody headband.
The door.
Oh, God, Steve.
Now, Pumpkinhead has to really get moving here, because he didn't show up until we were halfway through the movie, so he can't take his time. He starts tearing through these kids pretty quick. At the same time, Harley's kind of fighting to maintain his motor function due to his connection with Pumpkinhead.
Help me!
Maggie!
Tracy!
Maggie!
God damn it!
Maggie!
Tracy! Wait!
But he makes his way back to the witch and begs her to stop this. He says he's changed his mind. Now she informs him, hey, that's not an option. Now that it's started, it has to run its course. So he says in that case, he's going to stop it himself. And then Harley goes into action trying to save the people that killed his son, which is an interesting setup. And I do like that Harley decides to put himself in danger to save these people that he still clearly hates very much, as you'll see in a couple of scenes. Fonzie decides to sacrifice himself in order to stop this creature. He knows he's the one that this monster is after for some reason. So he goes outside to call it out, but Pumpkinhead clearly enjoys messing with and torturing people. So it decides to take his girlfriend instead.
I'm the one you want!
Now, the amount of personality that they're able to get out of this strange demonic creature is very impressive. Via its actions and its animatronic face, you really do feel like you understand exactly what it's trying to convey. There are times when it laughs at people, it smiles, it snarls. It's a really fun creature, and honestly, several $1 million budget today with CGI could not do it justice the way these practical effects do. It is a thing of beauty, and if you have any love for classic practical horror effects, you owe it to yourself to see this movie for that, if nothing else.
Joel, come on. We gotta move, man. Come on!
Harley soon arrives at the cabin himself, and he's clearly upset and struggling with all of this death and carnage that he is responsible for. Now, the 3 remaining survivors are banging on doors, screaming for help, just like that guy at the beginning of the movie that was being ignored. And once again, no one's willing to help them. They don't want to mess with Pumpkinhead.
Help! Somebody help us!
Help us! Anybody in there, please? There's something after us! Please!
Where's Steven?
Please!
Don't be mad, kid. I'm cold.
Come on. It's okay.
Harley catches up to them and he shoots Pumpkinhead, dropping it. Fonzie has his own gun and he walks over and shoots Pumpkinhead in the head to make sure it's dead, which is awesome and is something that more people in movies like this should do. However, Pumpkinhead's not your regular monster. This isn't enough, and we get my favorite kill in this movie where Pumpkinhead impales Fonzie with his own rifle. It is fantastic. We also get a really important clue in this scene about how to potentially deal with Pumpkinhead when a dog attacks Harley, and when it bites Harley on the arm, Pumpkinhead reacts to the damage Harley takes. We're down to only 2 of the others remaining. The kid that helped Harley find the witch comes out to help them because he wants to see if Pumpkinhead is real. He decides to take them to an old burned down church, thinking that maybe Pumpkinhead can't go there since it's holy ground. Once again, pretty good thinking, but it turns out that he definitely can go there, and we honestly get a pretty cool looking scene of Pumpkinhead walking through this old destroyed church. He even smashes an old wooden cross while he walks through just to show how much of a demon he is. Pumpkinhead also shows some serious intelligence. He sabotages cars so they won't work. And here towards the end, he removed the chain from a dirt bike and he even waves it at the others to taunt him, before lifting the entire bike with one arm and throwing him across the road. The other two escape with Harley and go back to his house. Other girl tries to have a moment with Harley while he's making an awesome homemade flamethrower. And Lance Henriksen shows some serious acting chops in this scene. He shows a lot of emotion with basically just a single look at this girl. And this is where you know he doesn't want to help these people because he likes them. He despises these people. He blames them for the death of his son. He's helping them because he knows this is his fault and he's trying to clean up his own mess.
Can't you stop this? Can't you call it off?
Nothing can call it off. But I'm gonna send it back to whatever hell it come from.
But he begins convulsing as Pumpkinhead approaches.
Mr. Harley?
In the most impressive effects of the entire film, Harley's face begins showing aspects of Pumpkinhead, and Pumpkinhead's face begins showing aspects of Harley's face, as they're sort of molding into a halfway in between creature for both of them. It is incredible how much they are able to capture the specific features of each of the characters and combine them together just with makeup and practical effects. It's incredible. But Harley accidentally impales himself in the shoulder on a pitchfork, and he sees the massive reaction from Pumpkinhead, and he finally figures out how to stop it. So he goes into his car, he reaches into his glove compartment, pulls out a revolver, and he shoots himself in the head. Sadly, it doesn't quite finish the job, as he's sort of sitting there wanting to die but unable to reach his gun again, and Other Girl is forced to finish him off for him. It's a strong ending. It is appropriate both thematically and narratively. Pumpkinhead's body bursts into flame as it dies, and then we see the witch burying Harley's now disfigured body in the hole he had dug Pumpkinhead out of, and we understand that his body will be used the next time Pumpkinhead is summoned. As I said at the beginning, this is a complicated critique for me, so I'm going to go through this a little bit differently than I normally do to try to help myself fully understand my feelings on this film. So I'm going to clearly lay out what I consider the positives and the negatives of this film, and I think at the end of that, I'll see exactly where my opinion lies. My biggest negative is Fonzie and the gang are completely uninteresting to me. They are clearly just thrown into the movie as something for Harley to want revenge against. I feel nothing for any of them. Anytime they're dying, they just waste screen space. The other negative is that different actors seem to be on completely different wavelengths in this movie. Most of the actors are completely hamming it up the whole time, which does work fine for the storybook setting, but then you have Lance Henriksen, who at least for the first half of the movie is playing it very low-key and realistic. And yeah, he has to ham it up a bit in the second half, especially in large emotional outburst scenes after his son dies, but everything is generally played pretty realistic for him. Both sides work, but in the same movie, it is emotionally confusing on how I should be feeling. Now, for the positives, number one will come as no surprise to you. The makeup and special effects in this movie are absolutely top-notch. Especially Pumpkinhead itself. Pumpkinhead is the star of the show. There's a reason that his name is the name of the movie. His movements are fluid. He looks incredible. He has emotion. He has more character than the majority of the characters in this film. I feel more emotionally connected to Pumpkinhead himself than I do to most of the others. Next biggest positive, Lance Henriksen himself. I know that I kind of counted him among the negatives, but it wasn't his performance that I considered negative. It was the dichotomy between his realistic and impressive performance and everyone else hamming it up. Taken on its own, his performance in this movie is fantastic, and I can't speak highly enough of it. And I know that since everyone else was hamming it up so much, Lance Henriksen we've seen in 1,000 different movies, no one hams it up better than him. So the fact that he played it so straight and real, it's clear to me this is what the director wanted from him, and he pulled it off great. Because if he wanted to ham it up, he could have outdone everyone else in this movie, no problem. The third biggest positive is the tone. This movie sets a very specific tone in scene one, and it perfectly artistically carries it through the entire movie. It is obvious this movie had a strong artistic vision, and it was never compromised. And even if that specific vision didn't always work for me, I tremendously respect pulling it off so flawlessly. Now, after covering my 3 biggest positives and my 2 biggest negatives, I think that number 3 there did answer my question for me. While I respect the artistic vision here, it is not an artistic vision that appeals to me. I find it an unpleasant movie to watch. I don't like the characters. This isn't a world I want to spend time in. I don't like the people. It feels dirty, and not in a way that I find interesting, but in a way that I just find uncomfortable, and I'd rather not be watching it. Because yeah, after seeing this movie 3 times now, I can honestly say I haven't really enjoyed my time watching it, even once. So I think that's all it comes down to. It's just not for me. It's just not my style at the end of the day. I think when critiquing films, you have to accept that objectivity can only go so far. And this is just a movie that my subjective experience just doesn't match my objective opinion. So I would happily recommend this movie to almost anyone based on its merits. But no matter how much I'd happily recommend it and say what a well-made film it is, I don't really want to watch it. It's just not for me. So with all of that said, that's still kind of schizophrenic and confusing take on the film. Let's see exactly where it goes on the list. While I rated Pumpkinhead at 3.5 stars, remember, this list is my subjective opinion. So even though I only gave Piranha 3 stars, and I do think Pumpkinhead is probably a better made movie, I vastly prefer Piranha as a film. I'd rather watch that any day of the week. So I am putting it below Piranha. However, everything still beats out the Funhouse. Thank you so much for bearing with me while I worked out my own complicated feelings on this movie this week. If you made it to the end here, I also want to say I'm sorry that there was such a long break between movies. Kind of been fighting back and forth with YouTube on some copyright strike stuff, and things just comes up in life. You never know. So I do intend to be uploading weekly, every single Thursday, moving forward from here with my new critiques. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you made it this far, give me a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment with your thoughts on this week's movie or on my critique. Have you seen Pumpkinhead? Did you like it? Were you as impressed with the special effects as I was? Did you find it as unpleasant as I did? I'd love to hear your feelings on this, so thanks so much, and I will catch you next week. Have a good one. Bye.